And what we know is that a child is most likely to be abused by an adult that he or she knows and trusts, someone who is close, such as a family member, a teacher, a priest, or even a camp counselor. And the process of grooming is one that involves trust. The perpetrator gains the trust of the child to allow him or her access to that child, but then also gains the trust of the family of that child, of the community, and of his coworkers. When it's a camp counselor that we're dealing with, quite often that camp counselor, supervisor, coworkers, always think that that individual is the best person at camp. The person who loves kids and will do anything and is always working around kids and going above and beyond. It's the person who is the face of the camp, quite honestly. And it's gaining that trust and standing in the community that allows the perpetrator to then bend rules and break rules, such as being one-on-one alone with a child, having outside contact or babysitting one of the campers, or giving gifts or special treatment.
So we've just told a few stories where horrific things happened. What should we have done differently?
First things first, we need to be aware. We need to know that this is a threat that is out there. And then we have to balance the trust that we have to have for one another as camp counselors with an appropriate level of scrutiny. We don't catch abusers abusing. We catch them breaking the rules. So when we see a counselor breaking the rules or bending the rules, or if we see something that just gives us a bad feeling in our gut, we can't ignore it. We can't brush it off just saying, well, that's just the way he is. It needs to be reported.
Gareth, you talk a lot about perceptual blindness when we talk about aquatic safety, right? A guard can't imagine that a child could be on the bottom of the pool because they've spent so many thousands of hours watching a pool where that hasn't happened. Is perceptual blindness a problem here too?
Yeah, I think it is, or at least something very similar. We can't believe that someone that we've known and worked with for 10 years could even have the thought about harming a child. It's someone that we stay up late nights with when all the campers have gone to bed and we tell stories. It's people that we room with. It's people that we see outside of camp. And it's someone, again, who's trusted in the community and well known. So we instinctively don't think, well, this person may be harming a child when they break or bend a rule. But we have to not let that get in the way and be very objective about how we view our coworkers.
So we really have kind of two challenges, it seems to me. The first is that we can't imagine that that other person would be behaving that way. The other problem is that because we don't have those motivations ourselves, we can't imagine that another person would have them. Not that specific other person, but that anybody would have those motivations. And that's difficult for us to get our heads around. Josh, you told the story about Miguel, a tough, tough story to tell. What were the moments of truth there?
You know, with Miguel, it's hard because, it's, as Gareth just said, he did all of those things. He would have his co-counselors leave the cabin early at night, so it was a treat for them. They'd get a 20-minute break while Miguel would settle the kids down and put them to bed. The co-counselor thought it was just something great. Every day I would walk by, and it would be different times, and in between classes, Miguel would be engaged with groups of campers. But never taking the time for himself. Never saw him by himself. So I think there was a few signs, just couldn't see it.
And really it was the rule breaking that Gareth talks about. Folks, this is a very, very difficult topic, but thank the good Lord, we are beginning to talk about this topic in ways that we just haven't in the past in this country. In this country, a girl who turns 18 this year will have a better than 1 in 4 chance of having been sexually abused. A boy, 1 in 6. 100,000 kids will be sexually abused this year in this country. And as Gareth said, almost always by someone that they know. Our responsibility is to keep kids safe. And in this case, we are not asking you to make a judgment about whether somebody is a sexual predator or not. We are simply asking you to be aware of and enforce all the rules that exist at your camp. And if we do that, counselors, staff, adults can't get access to kids in a way that's inappropriate. Kids will be kids. We hear that all the time about camp. And in a lot of ways, it's absolutely true. Kids make bad choices. Kids get tired. Kids eat foods they shouldn't be eating. Kids watch SpongeBob and Wipeout. But here's what we can't have. We can't have kids being mean. So you think I'm crazy? Kids won't be mean? Listen, I have 11-year-old twins. I've raised a 27-year-old daughter. I understand that kids can be mean sometimes, but not at camp. We are a values-centered community at our camps, which means that respect is at the core of how we behave towards one another. So even if kids have the instinct to be mean to one another, we're going to embrace them and help them understand that that's not how we do things here. Here we don't establish social power by insulting one another. Of course, what I'm getting at is the concept of bullying. Bullying ought not be a part of camp. Camp needs to be a supportive and nurturing environment within which kids can grow safely. That's what we're trying to build here. Now, interestingly, as much as we know about bullying, physical, verbal bullying, psychological bullying, all different kinds of bullying, we know it's about the use of social power. And that's not the environment that we want at our camp this summer. It's hugely important for you not only to understand that, but to live that. What that means is it's not appropriate for you to be insulting one another, even if that's cool or even if that's what happens before you get to camp, because that's not how we behave here. One of the most insidious elements of bullying is a connection that most of us have never made before, and that is that bullying, as it progresses to become more serious and more intense, can often lead to incidents of peer-to-peer sexual abuse. That's right. We're going to talk about that more in just a couple of minutes. But please keep that in mind as we listen to the stories that we're about to hear, and again, as you process them with the rest of the folks at camp, and understand how in your camp, with your values, you create the kind of safe and nurturing environment we just have to have.
Julie is a 9-year-old girl. She goes to day camp and she goes to before and after school care at the school where she goes during the school year. 2 of her classmates and fellow campers were bullying her. And by bullying, it was something that took place over a long period of time, both during summer camp and throughout the school year. It started with teasing and taunting and calling her names. There was also some physical bullying as well. They would push her. They would knock her books out of her hands. The other 2 girls even tried to trip her and push her down the stairs on one occasion. Eventually, Julie did tell her mother about some of the bullying that had been going on, and Julie's mother told both the school principal and the director of the camp about this. And the camp director assured her mother that they'd do something about it, but nothing was really done. They didn't separate the girls, they didn't discipline the other girls, they just said, well, we'll keep an eye on it. Unfortunately, the bullying continued. And the bullying eventually escalated into what we'd call peer-to-peer sexual abuse. When the girls had to go to the bathroom, instead of following the normal policy of having all of the campers go at the same time, the counselors sent the girls in the group of 3. And guess which 2 girls went with Julie, the very 2 girls who had been bullying her. When they were in the bathroom, unsupervised, the other 2 girls crawled underneath the stall walls and wound up sexually abusing Julie. They touched her in her private areas under her clothes, and they forced Julie to do the same to them. Sometime later, Julie then did report what happened to her mother. And as soon as her mother found out about it, she pulled Julie from both her school and from the camp program. About a year and a half later, Julie was still in counseling, going several times a week, talking about her experiences, talked about the bullying, but had not yet been able to fully talk about the sexual abuse that had taken place, but had told her counselor on many occasions about the dark thoughts she had had and how she had wanted to hurt herself. Again, this is a 10-year-old girl, and the effect that both bullying and sexual abuse had on her.
You're looking at an 8-year-old who was picked on in camp. One day I was standing by what was called the trough. We didn't have bathrooms in camp in those days. We had outhouses and troughs with splashing water. And the water splashed all over my pants. And all the kids in camp said, "Oh, look at him, he couldn't control himself. Look at him, he peed in his pants. Ha ha ha. Wow, wow, wow." And I was this big, gawky kid. And my camp time was miserable because of that. And also because my dad was the chairman of the camp committee, so he got to come to camp, and the other parents didn't. And that's really why they were picking on me. So I decided not to go back to camp. I didn't go back to camp for 2 years. And my dad had to talk me into going back as a teenager, and of course it became the most formative experience of my life. But I know what it's like to be picked on. Today we would have called it bullying. And that's why it's so important to think about that kid who's getting picked on in camp.
I hope you've had another good conversation about, frankly, a very difficult topic, but one I promise you every single camp will face this summer. The concept of peer-to-peer sexual abuse is difficult to think about, but it is very prevalent. So we're going to help you process a little bit of our prevention methods, and again, we'll probably capture some of the things that you've already discussed. So I want to start with resetting the frame. And Josh, I want to ask you, we spent a lot of time a few minutes ago on adult child sexual abuse prevention. Now we're talking about peer-to-peer sexual abuse prevention. They're very different dynamics, aren't they?
They are. In adult-to-adult child sexual abuse, the adult is finding the opportunities, finding their way into the organization.
Really creating their own opportunities.
Yes, finding where they can gain access and do all the grooming that we talked about in the last episode. When it comes to peer-to-peer abuse, the opportunities are presented to kids where they're in the bathroom and they're not being supervised. We're leaving them alone in cabins. So the opportunity is really presented to them. They're not seeking them out normally.
So in the peer-to-peer cases, it's a more opportunistic situation. And Gareth, you and I spend a lot of time talking about bullying, and it appears anymore that you can't watch a TV show or open a newspaper that there isn't some sort of a discussion in the media about bullying. Help us to understand and define bullying effectively so that we're not subject to kind of the overuse of the term.
Bullying involves two things. One is an imbalance of power, where one is clearly using a kind of social dominance over the other, and that plays out either physically or emotionally. But also it happens over time. A single incident is not bullying.
So we see, again, a pattern of behavior where there is this difference in power. Is there a connection between bullying and eventual sexual abuse?
There is. In the incidents that we've seen, a good number of the peer-to-peer sexual abuse incidents started with some level of bullying. And again, it's important to realize that it happened over time. So what may have started with teasing, with physical bullying, with knocking the books out of somebody's hands, and that then lasted throughout an entire summer, and then into the school year, possibly online as well. When those children then had an opportunity where they were unsupervised and the bullying was allowed to escalate, it may have then turned into what we call peer-to-peer sexual abuse. And that abuse, where one child may touch another child inappropriately, may force the other child to touch them, that's often not motivated sexually, as you would see in an adult-to-child episode, but is more motivated by the power structure that's similar to bullying.
So, had we stopped the bullying at some point, we would have stopped the eventual sexual episode.
Yes, if we had not allowed the bullying to continue and to escalate, then it likely would not have gotten to the point where, in an unsupervised location, the bullying progressed into peer-to-peer sexual abuse.
Josh, we hear all the time when there's been peer-to-peer sexual abuse or there's been an incident of bullying, that kids will be kids. There's nothing you can do about it. Kids will be kids.